We talked about prostitution last week and whether it can ever be an accepted form of work. Is it sex work or sexploitation? In a world where most of the sellers are women and most of the buyers are men, is it a viable economic choice when very few options exist? Or is it a manifestation of capitalist patriarchy where women are exploited? The premise that women can ever voluntarily or freely choose to be a prostitute animates the debates on sex trafficking. On the one hand, there are those who conform to what Joyce Outshern calls the sexual domination frame, where trafficking and prostitution are regarded as one and the same. All acts of prostitution are seen as the sexual exploitation of women, where women's bodies are treated as commodities to be bought, sold, and trafficked like any commodity traded by criminals such as drugs and arms, without dignity or worth. Women can never voluntarily or freely choose to be a prostitute. Trafficking is caused by prostitution, and therefore its abolition is regarded as a necessary condition for putting an end to trafficking. The sexual domination frame is grounded in radical feminist thinking. On the other hand, there are those who see prostitution as sex work. As we discussed last week, many women end up selling their bodies for monetary gain because they have very few economic options. In some instances, women migrate for sex work. This is not trafficking. Rather, it is a manifestation of globalized economic realities where women, like other laborers, are drawn to areas of greater opportunity and higher compensation. What becomes problematic is when anti-trafficking activists curtail these opportunities for women to migrate for sex work because these activists are, at the root, opposed to prostitution. Thus, we are back to where we were last week with the debates around prostitution. The linkage between trafficking and prostitution in the context of the ascendance of the trafficking issue in the contemporary global agenda, along with the feminist debates around this issue, will be the focus of our work in this module. Whereas prostitutes, as we discussed last week, are stigmatized and thus shunned by society, trafficked women and children have moved the global community to action. A trafficking protocol was adopted in 2000 by the United Nations and came into force 3 years later. Why did the trafficking issue become such a prominent issue in the global arena at that point in time? What role did women's groups play in placing sex trafficking on the international agenda, and how did they reflect the philosophical differences in feminism about prostitution? I've asked you to watch a video online entitled Enslaved and Exploited, The Story of Sex Trafficking in Canada, and to read an article by Joyce Outshern. I have 3 primary goals in this module. First, I want you to understand what sex trafficking means, how it differs from human trafficking, and how human trafficking in turn differs from human or migrant smuggling. Second, I want you to reflect on why sex trafficking has become such a prominent issue in the global arena. It has become a topic of interest for academics and activists, politicians and journalists, Hollywood celebrities, and everyday people alike. Third, I want you to consider the arguments on whether prostitution and trafficking are one and the same. This will further illustrate the divide amongst feminists. If you've watched documentaries or even Hollywood movies depicting trafficking, you will be familiar with the gravity of exploitation and the degree of harm faced by countless women and children throughout the world. What I want you to consider is the extent to which the rise in anti-trafficking activism has undermined future prospects for prostitution becoming an accepted form of work. Whether that is a good or a bad thing, of course, depends on your stance on prostitution. I look forward to class discussion on this issue. The statistics are mind-boggling. The images are stark. The stories are heart-wrenching. And the words are unequivocal. Modern sex slavery, where the victims are primarily women and children who are purchased, moved, and sold like commodities. This is the dominant view of sex trafficking, and it is spurring individuals and groups throughout the world to action. Sex trafficking, or trafficking for the purpose of sexual exploitation, primarily prostitution, is a gendered phenomenon that activists say need to be understood, propagated, and eliminated. This is not about sex, it is about slavery. This is not about choice, it is about exploitation. This is not about work, it is about prostitution.